Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. I am Michael Murphy. I'm the founder and creator of the Murphy Media YouTube channel. On the channel, we've been given the very unique opportunity to talk with volunteers that are actively serving in Ukraine, that are making a real difference on the ground. This week, we were very fortunate to be joined by Kevin Raison, the founder of the Bluestar Sunflower Project. We were actually given this connection by our good friend Harley Whitehead, who we've had on the channel several times, and look forward to having him again, of course. So Harley, we really appreciate the connect. Being able to talk with Kevin and gain his insight and perspective on a different area of the conflict, just very grateful. And Kevin was able to share the founding of Sunflower, the monetary donations that were necessary to start it, the hard work that went into the supply chain aspect of this, and at the end, he was able to share a very deeply personal story for him. And then he very skillfully added a carrot right at the end, just to keep us wanting a little bit more information. So we look forward to having Kevin back on to detail the teaser that is at the end of this, and I'm sure we're going to be watching with very much excitement the hard work that's going to continue from the Sunflower Project. So Kevin, we appreciate it, and for you, the viewers, we appreciate you tuning in and giving us your time, and we wanted to create a reference point for anyone who may be tuning into this conflict anywhere in the world to start putting faces to what would otherwise be a faceless conflict. So again, we appreciate it, and we look forward to creating more good content for you and sharing the stories of these brave men and women.
Hey, how are you?
Good evening.
I've actually had a difficult day, but I'm doing all right at the moment. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. It's a real honor. Make sure we have our...
Yeah, I'm on Keystar internet at the moment because the Wi-Fi here isn't working, so I might be a little laggy. No.
Okay.
All right.
Well, we'll do the best we can, and we'll go ahead. For everybody that's joining us, we're joined with today with Kevin Raison with the Bluestar Sunflower Project. And this is going to be a very different look from what we're used to. We've been joined with friends that are primarily serving in the East, volunteers, and this will be a look at more of what's going on in the South, so a little bit of a different perspective, more in the Raison region. And Kevin has a very unique story, and I want to keep this as open-ended as I can and give you the best platform possible to explain what Bluestar Sunflower is. Sunflower, the Sunflower Project, it seems to go with different names, so it may be used interchangeable for anybody that's joining us. So Kevin, if you could give us kind of your perspective on how you became involved in this. I've read the bio on the website, but for people that will just be joining and taking a look after, if you could give us a little background into yourself and how you became involved.
First, I'd just like to say thank you for talking with me this evening. I really appreciate it. So where to start? I've been living in Ukraine off and on for about 3 years, a little over 3 years, I guess, at this point. Funny enough, and came to visit her in Kiev and fell in love with the place as well, and was back and forth for a while between here and the United States because of health problems with my father. And I think probably about 2 years ago, I settled here permanently. So I got my residency and set up a home in Kiev, and we ended up engaged. And Ukraine was very much becoming my home at that point, and that's kind of significant in a number of ways. I had kind of pulled up stakes in the U.S. in 2017, and really wasn't living there. Was traveling around the world. Was a bit rudderless, and Ukraine kind of adopted me, and for the first time in, I guess, at that point, 4 or 5 years, I finally found a place to settle. So it was a really big deal to finally finally have a home again after being rudderless for so long. So fast forward to February of last year, at about 10 or 14 days or so before the Russian invasion, I finally finished all of the paperwork and got my residency in Ukraine, and was starting to do all the things that one does when you start to make a home. I was searching for an apartment to buy in Kiev. I had been renting a car the entire time I had been living here, and was actually car hunting at that point. And so I was really just settling in, and then the Russians came and blew that whole thing up. And the other part of that story is that I had decided to buy a very specific vehicle because I was a little worried that something was going to happen with the Russians mid-February, early February of last year. And I one of my hobbies back in the U.S., I had always been a Land Rover mechanic, working on and restoring the old ones. And there's an equivalent vehicle in the Slavic world, in the post-Soviet world, called an UAZ. And when it started looking like the Russians were actually going to come in, my thought was, all right, I'm going to buy a car anyway because I'm settling. Maybe I should buy one of these so I have an appropriate vehicle in case something happens, and something to bug out in. So I had actually gone to Kharkiv the week before the invasion started. And so when the Russians did come in on the 24th, I was actually staying at a hotel in Kharkiv. And my alarm clock on February 24th at 5 o'clock in the morning was a missile strike that was maybe 500 meters from my hotel. My fiance was at home in Kiev. And so I jumped in my car, went back to Kiev, a rental car, because I wasn't able to complete the transaction and actually buy the car I had gone to Kharkiv to buy. And eventually got us out. And my intention was to get out, regroup, and figure out what to do to support Ukraine in the conflict. And on my way out of the country, a good friend of mine, guy I've worked on many projects with over the last probably 25 years, who also had an interest in Ukraine and had lived here a couple of times and was in the process of writing a book on the history of the country. He contacted me while I was on my way out of Ukraine at the very beginning of this, and was kind of my man in the chair. So he was in front of his computer for the 48 hours it took me to get out of the country, and was checking the maps, checking all the news updates, telling me which routes to take, which routes not to take, so on and so forth. So he helped me tremendously to get out of the country safely. And so he and I started talking after I took an evening to rest and have some nightmares and recover a little bit from my ordeal. And we put together the idea to support Ukraine as best we could as volunteers, kind of taking a little bit of a hint from the Spanish Civil War. Something like the Abraham Lincoln Brigades, they were all ambulance drivers, but a similar idea. So I was in Poland at that point, in Warsaw, and I started the process with my friend Rick, putting together a 501c3 in the U.S., which we somehow managed to get put together and approved by the IRS in about 5 days. So, like, very beginning of March, we had a 501c3, which that never happens apparently. I had never done this before, so it was very new to me. So anyway, we put together this foundation. I purchased a couple of vehicles in Poland, and we started sourcing supplies and everything, right? So we at that stage, there was no clear communication about what was needed. The volunteer network hadn't really solidified into anything comprehensible. So, we were doing our best to figure out what was needed, where it was needed, and we were sourcing it and basically doing the entire international logistics chain, which neither Rick nor myself had any experience with whatsoever. Somehow managed to figure out how to navigate that. And we were bringing in MREs and supplies for pets, animals, and for civilians as well. And bringing this stuff into Poland, taking it from Poland into Ukraine, various parts of the country. And that was our routine for the first few months of the war. And I mean, we are I guess, officially a humanitarian aid organization, but honestly, obviously, we've chosen a side. You know, Ukraine is our side in this conflict, and you know, we do everything we can to support the military here, the International Legion, civilians, IDPs, as well as the animal population. And so I'll stop there and let you interject if you want, because I'm not sure what direction to go.
No, absolutely. That's fantastic. I'm taking notes as you go, and in quotes, Ukraine is our side. I think that's fantastic. And maybe when this is over, we can get you back to the States, and you can share some of that magic on getting the federal government to move at the speed of light. That's amazing. Um, so international logistics, massive undertaking, obviously. Fundraising. Where did you start? This is not. There's a lot of charitable organizations out there, but this, like all things in the world, it takes funding. It takes money. How did you go about?
Well, so how I got started was
how'd you get started?
As close to a miracle as one could imagine. So I have a pretty mixed background. I'm a computer scientist. I used to do artificial intelligence research for DARPA, amongst other private companies as well. And I'm also a psychologist, and I'm also a dancer. So I haven't really done a whole lot of tech stuff in a while. Kind of when I pulled up stakes in the U.S. a number of years ago, I kind of quit doing much tech. But I did maintain a couple of small clients, one of which I think has been a client since 2000. And they had, at the beginning of the war, about 220 some employees based in Dnipro. So while what brought me to Ukraine was this woman that I was in love with, I also had work here. And the company itself is based in Seattle, which is where I used to be based when I was in the States. And the folks who run the company, there's a pair of them, a guy named Bob and a woman named Liz, really wanted to do everything they could to support their people in Dnipro, all of their Ukrainian employees. And when they found out that I was doing what I was doing in the first few days, they pledged $50,000 to my organization to get us started. And there's no way I could have done anything that I've done over the last year 14 months without that startup. That money went pretty quickly. I mean, that mostly bought MREs. The vehicles I actually purchased with the money I had been saving up to buy a house within Ukraine. You know, so the startup capital was a combination of those two things. And then from that point forward, especially at the very beginning, and this has unfortunately changed significantly, probably even in the last, I'd say, 10 months. But at the very beginning, the response from people in the U.S., mainly via social networks, Facebook and Instagram, was tremendous. You know, and we got lots of $100, $500 donations from friends, family, friends of friends, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, you know, after 14 months, that kind of support really doesn't come in like it used to. So the other ways that we have fundraised have been. Rick and I at one point went back to Seattle and did a fundraiser in Seattle with merchandise, you know, war memorabilia type stuff that we had been collecting while we were traveling around Ukraine. And remarkably, that didn't do as well as we had hoped. We paid basically, that fundraiser paid our travel and our expenses for the trip and not too much more. So we haven't done anything like that since. Year-end donations, end of 2022, a lot of people who had been donating to us in small amounts and some in large amounts up to that point chose to wait till the end of the year so they could get, you know, the big tax break, and dropped a bunch of donations on us at that point. So that's mainly what's kept us going. That and I put in, like I say, quite a bit of personal money into this. Yeah.
Well, God bless. And
yeah, most definitely. I do actually. I want to toss in something else when it comes to fundraising. And this is a new and kind of in-process thing for us. And maybe it opens the question or opens up the space to talk about Mykolaiv and Kherson. So we support many villages in those two regions. And we were just sort of luckily in a position where as the Russians were retreating out of those areas, we were not too far behind them as we were coming in because of friends that we have in Mykolaiv, and going into villages that were freshly liberated and bringing supplies, bringing generators, so on and so forth. And so we got to know a lot of folks, and we got to see a lot of the destruction before it had been touched by the sappers, before it had been, seen by too many other people. And so, we've been working with these villages and developing these relationships here in Mykolaiv as well since that point in time. And one of the things that we see, unfortunately, is that there's not a whole lot of help available beyond the Band-Aids. And when I say Band-Aids, I mean, there are plenty of groups who are bringing in boxes of food that'll support a family for a week or two. There are plenty of groups that are bringing in generators. There are plenty of groups that are bringing in, supplies of that nature that are like stopgaps. But I haven't seen a whole lot of people thinking about the long term. And when you see what's going on in these villages, when you see the state that they're in, it's without seeing it, it's really, really hard to imagine how bad things really are in this region. And the amount of money and the amount of time and the resources that are going to be required to rebuild is just beyond imagining. So, all that being said, the project that I'm working on now is, I'm calling it Adopt a Village. So we're amongst all these villages that we support, I'm kind of starting with two, and we're going to be fundraising directly for these two villages, and fundraising in terms of rebuilding, demining, doing all the things that need to be done to bring life back to these places, because there are tons and tons of people who want to come home, and there are farmers who are out farming mined fields at this point and dying on a regular basis because they have no income, they have to farm, and they only have rudimentary equipment for clearing the fields, and the sappers can only do so much. So there's just so much work to be done, and that's really where we're going to be focusing fundraising efforts from this point forward. And I'll let you know how successful we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we'll be right there with our network to help in every way we can. That is a novel concept. Adopt a village. That's fantastic. So, and as you said, opening up to talk about Mykolaiv and Kherson, there is, to be gracious, there is still a level of interest here in the West, and I believe that the discussion of the upcoming counteroffensive, much anticipated, is drawing people back into the fold, and they're paying a little bit more attention. The last big push that the Ukrainians made in the Kharkiv region, the Kherson region, amazing success. Just two very chunks of land, pushing the Russians out of those territories. And I think what's important for people in the West to understand, that you'll be able to talk about, the shelling did not stop in those areas. The shelling has not stopped in Kherson to this day. We have a couple of American veteran contacts that were actually in Mykolaiv that I know personally now. And so if you could, to open it up to talk about those regions that you said, as I mentioned, the violence has not stopped. The shelling has not stopped. Can you give us a glimpse into what you have seen in those regions? I think bringing those stories to people here where they can have a point of contact with someone on the ground that's seeing it, that can describe it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so I think two things I think I want to say. So first is about villages that are further back from the front line, and Mykolaiv. Like Mykolaiv was shelled, rockets were launched at it every day for 8 or 9 months, if not longer. When you drive around the city at this point, there's some destroyed building or partially destroyed building on every block. When we were here in before we settled here, when we were just coming in and out as part of our other operations, we were staying in an apartment here in Mykolaiv, and block and a half away, 6 o'clock in the morning, I think, there was a missile strike, and so we were out of the apartment and over at this other apartment building that was near us, and saw the destruction before too many other folks had arrived. Six people died, family, children, and what's really messed up is that there's a kindergarten that was right next door to this. And the consensus amongst all of the locals was that, and this came down a bit, I think, from Vitaly Kim, was that the Russians were actually aiming for that kindergarten because they were assuming it was a barracks, that the Ukrainians were housing soldiers there, and they missed, and they had this apartment building. They cluster bombed the zoo in Mykolaiv. And the zoo here in Mykolaiv is the oldest zoo in the country, 120 some years old, if I remember correctly. So it's a point of pride. And so the Russians went out of their way to not just shell it, but use cluster bombs on the zoo, right? So Mykolaiv has this history. And fortunately at this point, we get air raids pretty regularly, though not as regularly, air raid sirens pretty regularly, though not as regularly as we used to. Nothing is hit here in quite some time. And so, up here in Mykolaiv and then in the villages in the Mykolaiv region that were occupied or right on the front lines, what you have at this stage is a level of destruction that, like I was just talking about, that's really hard to imagine. And as you get closer and closer to the Dnieper River, you have that same level of destruction plus shelling, plus, a constant barrage. And in Kherson City as well. Every day, especially in the evening. So we have operations here and down there. And so we're down at Kherson City working quite a bit. And when we're down there, there's usually some during the day, there's a fair amount of outgoing as well as incoming. And then as the sun starts to set, of course, the incoming increases. And it's just background noise at this point. It's just every day. And it's the same thing in all of these villages is along the river and a bit, not too far back from the river as well. But nobody makes any real obvious moves other than the shelling at this stage. The other thing that I think is probably worth noting so that people kind of understand that this isn't just a conflict between two armies and, two sets of artillery and that kind of thing. Oh, I want to say, what is it? Mid-April, 2 or 3 weeks ago, in one of the local channels, Telegram channels that is relevant to Kherson region or Kherson City in particular, there was an announcement that the curfew was being set back to 5 p.m., which normally it's like 7 or 8 p.m., because Russian saboteurs had managed to somehow cross the river and had been infiltrating the area. Right, and we get reports like that from various sources semi-regularly. And even here in Mykolaiv, just yesterday, there was an announcement on the Mykolaiv Municipal Telegram channel that one of the main water tanks in the city had suffered an accident, was the way it was put in the public channel, and that various parts of the city were going to have the water cut off, and so on and so forth. And on all of the local Mykolaiv channels, the non-official Mykolaiv channels, the discussion was that this was sabotage, right? That this was Russian saboteurs that had done this, and the municipality just didn't want to cause a scare by discussing it. I don't know which is true, right? So this is what life is like, right? It's not just that there's shelling, it's not just that there's destruction, it's also that there is no full accounting of how many Russian troops were left in Kherson and Mykolaiv after the retreat. There were a lot of stories during the retreat about Russian commanders telling certain groups of soldiers to stay behind, throw away their uniforms, get into plain clothes, and insert themselves into communities as best they could so that they could be used later for whatever nefarious purposes. And so we live with those realities every day, and it's a strange thing to walk around Mykolaiv and Kherson, especially as a foreigner, because you never really know who it is that's staring at you and what that guy on the cell phone who's been standing on the corner for 2 hours talking on his phone, what's he doing? And that kind of thing is always in the back of your mind as you're walking around. Um, yeah, and at the same time, you've got a lot of people coming back to villages in the Mykolaiv region in particular. A lot of people coming into Mykolaiv. Like when I first started coming into Mykolaiv last summer, it was a ghost town. It was a ghost town. We were all warned not to speak English while walking the streets. The shelling and the missiles were constant, so on and so forth. And I think the last statistic I heard was like 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, about 70,000 people had come back to the city. And so the city's alive again. I mean, and for me, having gotten to know it when it was a ghost town, it seems like a vibrant, place with all kinds of things going on. And when I talk to my local friends, they're like, no, this is maybe a quarter of what we're used to in terms of life in the city. So, it's a really bizarre mix. I don't know how to describe it. Because I'm in the process myself of building a life here in Mykolaiv, while all the rest of that is going on. So there's kind of there's my mind and my heart are always kind of split.
Sure.
If that makes any sense.
A tangible disconnect. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as logistics go, there are no flights into Ukraine. That fundraising aside, the logistics, moving supplies, I wouldn't even know where to start. How did you? I can't imagine how you. Obviously, there are NATO countries on the border of Ukraine. Poland has been a conduit into the country that almost everyone's using. How did you, to the degree that you can, I know that there will be some operational security involved with this, how did you develop a logistics chain to move supplies into the country?
I mean, quite honestly, brute force. We didn't know what we were doing in the beginning. And we just knew that something had to be done. And especially in the first 4 or 5 months of the conflict, the Poles made life a lot easier than it normally would have been for people in our position. That's not to say that there weren't tons and tons of problems, but especially in those early months, once we managed to get whatever we were going to bring into Ukraine, at least into Poland, once that part of the logistics chain was taken care of, from Poland into Ukraine was easy. I mean, there were no document checks. If you showed up speaking English with a van full of stuff that looked like it wasn't going to kill somebody, the Poles would just wave you through, and the Ukrainians as well. So, at that beginning sort of free for all, I'm sure I know, I'm not just sure, but I know that there was plenty of people taking advantage. There were plenty of people taking advantage of that. There's plenty of smuggling. There's plenty of graft, so on and so forth. But it did make our job a whole lot easier, and it allowed us to set up a lot of relationships that have helped us as we've moved forward. So, I'll rewind for a second and say that, like, during that period when we were still doing the full logistics chain, I was aging prematurely. I was working 20 plus hours every day. I wasn't sleeping. And like I say, it really was brute force. We developed relationships with folks in Poland who would help us with customs. We took advantage of the fact that there was easy crossing of the border. But that amount of work and then doing the delivering into Ukraine was ultimately just too much for a small organization of like 2 or 3 people. So at this stage, and I started working on shifting us in this direction last year. We don't do that full logistics chain anymore ourselves. In those early days, we started building partnerships with a number of other larger, older organizations who've been doing stuff like this for a really, really long time. They have the resources, they have the know-how, and they have the ability to get stuff all the way to us, either in Kiev or somewhere else in Ukraine. And then we can take it from there and do what we always had intended to do, which is the last mile delivery, right? Direct delivery to hospitals, direct delivery to soldiers, direct delivery to villages, so on and so forth. And so, at this stage, the magic really is other people who have a hell of a lot more experience than me. Yeah, I think that's my answer.
Absolutely. No, that's the brute forced. That's a very good term for it.
No, tenacity, man. I mean, that was it. It was like we had no idea what we were doing, but we had to figure it out. You know, and like sometimes it was the easiest thing in the world because you'd get the right customs agent who decided that us as volunteers trying to support Ukraine were doing the right thing, and he was going to grease whatever needed to be greased and make it all go really, really smoothly. You know, and then sometimes luck wasn't so good. Like we had a shipment of $38,000 worth of MREs that had to come into the European Union. And for whatever reason, the folks who shipped it for us from the U.S., we got donated shipping for this one. So we didn't have to pay for that. It was airlift, actually. They sent it through Germany to Poland. And there's a special kind of visa, or I think it's a transit visa, a transit paperwork that you get if you want to bring something through the European Union and then take it out. This is boring stuff, but it's worth listening to for half a second for the story. So the special paperwork basically states that the stuff you have coming into the European Union isn't officially entering the European Union. So it can transit and go to its destination without too much in the way of paperwork, too much in the way of inspections, you know, so long as you stamp everything correctly and sign the right stuff and make the right people happy. But for some reason, there was a veterinary inspector in Frankfurt, Germany, where the stuff initially landed in the EU, who decided that because our MREs contained meat, he wanted documentation about every single animal that had been used in the production of the meat, the gelatin, the dairy products, so on and so forth. And he held up a shipment of you know, almost $40,000 worth of MREs for nearly 2 months because of this. And had we known we needed this, we didn't think we needed it because it's transit in Europe. It's not supposed to be inspected in Europe. Had we known we needed this, the company on the other end in the U.S. would have happily brought in the U.S. FDA. They would have stamped a whole bunch of stuff and sent it along, and it wouldn't have been an issue. But we didn't know that, right? And this is why I say it's brute force, because there's this kind of knowledge we just didn't have. So in the end, the only way we were able to get this stuff released, we tapped into the volunteer network, which by that point was just a few months in, was already huge and was sort of self-organized, right? It was becoming a coherent entity, and you could reach out and get response super quick, you know, especially on stuff like this. And so I reached out to a colleague. He brought a group of, I think, a dozen different people together from all over Western Europe and from Ukraine, who everybody in that group knew somebody, either in the press, somebody in politics in some country or another, so on and so forth. And we basically, this group of, I think it was 14 of us total, just started applying pressure to this veterinary inspector. He had made the mistake of giving us his phone number and address in an email that he sent to us about this. And so we just harassed him. We threatened him with politicians. We threatened him with the press showing up at his doorstep, so on and so on and so forth. And the CEO of the company in the U.S. that manufactures the MREs that we had purchased also started contacting him. And we actually had no idea what it is that finally motivated this guy to release those MREs. But one day we just all of a sudden got a notification that the shipment was now moving again, and it was on its way to Poland. But dude, it was 2 months, right? So, you know, there are the bureaucratic mindset in international logistics really did cause a lot of problems, you know, especially at the beginning. You know, that those MREs really should have been in the field much, much earlier on. I have seen what the Ukrainian soldiers have to eat, and it's like Soviet Red Army style rations a lot of the time. They're carrying these giant glass bottles full of like pickled pig's feet or the Ukrainian equivalent thereof and that kind of thing. You know, so sorely needed materials, and a bureaucrat decided to rob us of it basically for that long. So anyway, that's why I use brute force as my descriptor, because, you know, we didn't know, and we faced a lot of problems at the beginning because of it. And I'm happy to have been able to hand it off.
Well, and I think you and I, you seem to be a pure optimist, so a realist, but an optimist.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
Does this? I hope that this will be the last war in continental Europe. And I'm sure that our grandfathers had the same vision when they left from World War II. Does this, and this is just an idea that just came to me. Does this have the potential to serve as a model, what you've done, what other volunteers have done? And is there a way to keep what you've done intact? To a degree, obviously the volunteers will change and so on, but are there learning experiences that can be codified, may not be the right word, but kept track of and passed down in the advent of a future conflict? Whereas the United States, just broadly speaking, when this started, we're talking about Abrams tanks going over. Today there's a report that we may be sending more Abrams tanks over. We're still having a discussion about aircraft and ATACMS and so on. Is there something that could be taken from your experience and in a coordinated way put together, almost like a field guide for volunteers? This is what we do, this is how we do it, and this is why we did what we did.
Oh man, that's an interesting one. I mean, I immediately get philosophical with that question. You know, it's like for me personally, you know, my family has a tradition of serving in the military. I didn't serve directly. I served as a civilian in DARPA. You know, but you know, every man in my family, myself included, were Boy Scouts, right? You know, and in those kinds of traditions, there is the spirit of volunteerism, right? Like I was born in Oklahoma and raised around the country because of an Air Force father, but always ended up somehow back in Oklahoma. A lot of things I don't like about the place, but one of the things that I do really love about the place, you know, you go to a small town in Oklahoma and there's a little old lady, you know, whose family is no longer there. She's all by herself. Everybody in the community makes sure that she's okay. And that's just the way it is. It's just the way that you behave. And so for me, you know, the most important part of making something like this massive, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's 900 some thousand was the number Zelensky gave in a speech a while back as to how large this volunteer network is at this stage. It's huge. Wow. The foundation of that is that value, you know, is that just that basic understanding of what it is to be a good neighbor, you know, what it is to serve a community. And I think, you know, whatever field guide we would write definitely needs to have that as its preamble, you know, and I don't know how you foster that just in a field manual. You know, that's in how we raise our children. That's in the values that we carry around with us. So, I mean, that's the most important piece in my mind, you know, just basic human decency. And man, I don't know, otherwise, tenacity, you know, because the thing about a conflict like this is that everything is constantly changing, right? You know, every time you think you settle into some kind of a rhythm and you have an understanding of what the next few weeks are going to look like based on what the last few weeks looked like, everything changes, right? The front lines shift, the way that the fighting is going down changes, the needs change, who needs what changes. You know, the attitudes of soldiers and policemen at the roadblocks change. You know, one day they're your best friends when you're going through, the next day they don't believe any of your documents are real and they, you know, detain you for 6 hours. You know, so it is one of the most important skills in working in an environment like this is adaptability, constantly being able to change the way that you operate in the field in the face of changes that you can't possibly predict. So that might be chapter one, you know, some combination of adaptability and tenacity. And it would be the easiest thing in the world to face one of those moments where everything all of a sudden changes on you and just give up because you don't know how to deal with the new thing that's come along. But you have to, right? At least for me, you know, there's just not a choice. You just keep on working and you figure it out. God, what else would I put in this thing? Yeah, this might be a sensitive subject, but it's one that comes up, unfortunately, too often. And that's the human relations piece of being part of this volunteer network. And I hate to say stuff like this, especially the psychologist in me, you know, because I want to dig into everybody's minds and hearts and figure them out and like them regardless of who they are, you know. But unfortunately, in this scenario, that mindset is dangerous. There are a lot of people who are out here for the wrong reasons. There are a lot of people who are out here who bring their alcoholism with them, bring their drug addictions with them, you know, and things of that nature. And I have made the mistake a couple of times with various volunteers that have come into our organization, and I've let people stick around too long who were detrimental, right? Not just to our organization, but also to Ukraine, you know, because if you're going to be stealing medicine out of humanitarian aid packages, if you're going to be drinking while we're working out in the field, you know, if you can't manage yourself, you don't have a place here. You put everybody in danger. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of that. So I have had to adapt and make really difficult decisions about just cutting people out who are dangerous. And that's tough for me because I love people. I wouldn't be doing the stuff that I'm doing if I didn't want to help everybody. You know, it's my nature. But yeah, that's an unfortunate reality in all of this.
That's fascinating. We've heard through several of the people we've interviewed that this has become there is a kind of a magnet associated with this conflict that has drawn people like that. Are they searching for purpose? Is that what they're doing?
I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a whole lot of that, searching for purpose, you know. And then I've also seen, you know, some instances where you've got folks who may have been sober at home, you know, and maybe bored with their lives, and came searching for purpose, and then without all of the little things that sort of keep you in check when you're in your home, in your own community, you know, the temptation of pills, alcohol, you know, whatever it might be, you get into it a whole lot easier. And, you know, add in the level of stress that you're dealing with on a daily basis. And and that's a pretty bad combination, pretty toxic. Yeah.
One of my favorite questions I like to ask, it actually came to me in the middle of an interview with our mutual friend, Harley. If you had politics aside, if you had an audience with the President of the United States, the President of Poland, Zelensky himself, whoever it may be, Rishi Sunak, and you had to deliver to them a message. Obviously, the humanitarian effort in this, that's your mission, working with the Legion, doing these things you're doing. If you had to take to them a message, you are falling short here, you're doing well there. What kind of message would you deliver in an audience like that?
I would tell them that they need to quit waffling, that they need to stop taking so much time. They need to fully support this conflict on the Ukrainian side, plain and simple. You know, I personally don't think that this conflict needed to take this long, right? And I think one of the main reasons it's taken this long is that the West has had the tap barely open when it comes to military support. And the West has given a lot, right? And but not enough. Not enough. That I think is the message that I would send. You know, like you said, politics aside, there's the risk, right? The more the West gets involved, the more Putin is going to saber rattle about nuclear weapons. But this, I mean, when I see the destruction, when I see the things that are happening in this country, all that I can think is that so much of this could have been averted. So much of this could have been avoided had we all just stepped. And I mean, quite honestly, before this, I was a bit of a pacifist. You know, I want a peaceful, happy life. You know, I don't want to spend my life fighting. But the realities of what I've seen over the last 14 months have changed my mindset. And you have to be strong in the face of somebody like Putin. You can't waffle. You can't do what Obama did with Crimea, right? You can't let someone like this take. And I mean, I it's people say it in the press all the time. Maybe it's become a cliche, but it's a fact. You know, the psychology of the authoritarian is like that. You know, you're like, yeah, okay, fine. You came in with force, you took this thing, we'll let you have that. It just emboldens that mindset. And our lack of much, much stronger response is why this conflict has gone on so long. The Russians are obviously not good at what they're trying to do.
Right.
And we have everything necessary in our arsenal to put a stop to this.
I believe that's a sentiment shared by many here in the West. I can appreciate the sensitivity of balancing an alliance when you have different international interests involved, but as you said, at what cost? The cost of war is escalating daily, and I think you put into words what a lot of people here at home feel also. And let me ask you this: we've covered several topics. I know you're a busy man. Is there anything you would like to put out that we haven't covered?
I want to tell a story, if I may, and if we have time.
Sure.
And I'll compress it as much as I can. And it kind of goes to this adopt a village idea that I was just talking about earlier. And I want to tell a little bit of the story of a particular village. There's a village in Mykolaiv region called Blahodatne, and Blahodatne translates as blessing or blessed. And there's a lot of villages with interesting names like that in the region. So Blahodatne was occupied, and it wasn't just occupied, it was brutally taken over. Small village, exact population before the war, I think around 300, but I could be wrong. But, you know, a small farming village. It was a beautiful place, well cared for. You know, the fields were active. There was cattle, you know, pigs, you know, all the things you would expect. And the Russians, first they came in with helicopters and bombed it from the air. And then they parked tanks outside of the village and shelled it for, I think, at least 3 days with tanks, and destroyed every single structure in this village. There's not a single building that isn't at least missing a roof, if not, you know, most of its walls. And then they occupied it. And when they retreated, they poisoned the wells, and booby trapped all kinds of things. We've found booby traps out in the fields around and when you stand in Blahodatne, and you look out, there are tree lines everywhere, right, separating all the different farmers' fields, and every single one of those tree lines is Russian trenches, right? So they were really, really deeply dug in. And like I said, they booby trapped and mined everything on the way out. And there's a particular friend of ours who's from this village, guy by the name of Dima. And if you go to my Instagram or Sunflower Project's Instagram, you'll see a whole bunch about Dima. Dima was in the village when the Russians were coming in, and he escaped. He's 26 years old, I think. He escaped the village with 2 or 3 kids, one on his back, one under his arm, and I think one by the hand, under fire by the Russians. Somehow managed to miss him and the kids that he was running out with. And he escaped and got to Mykolaiv, and was staying in Mykolaiv. And when the Russians left, he didn't move back yet, but a number of other, I think 5 guys, moved back to this village to try and rebuild. They had no water. The Russians had either destroyed all of the electrics or ran off with the copper, you know. So there's no power, there's no gas, there's no water because the wells were poisoned. And so Dima decided, I think about 3 weeks ago, and Dima has shown us around. He's been our guide in that area, right? He's shown us where all the Russian positions were, where the sappers have been, where they haven't been, where it's safe to go, the right roads, so on and so forth. You know, he's helped us out a whole lot. So I think about 3 weeks ago, he decided it was finally time to start working on his house. So he went back to Blahodatne, cleaned up his place as much as he could. You know, he's been looking for his cat this entire time. So when he's roaming around Blah.NA, he's always got a cat carrier strapped to him. He's running around in his tactical gear and doing everything that he does out there to support the place, looking for his cat. So he's finally starting to make his home again, and you know, where Sunflower Project is helping him and the other guys in this village to do, you know, to stay alive and to rebuild as much as we can afford to help him rebuild. And he and all the other folks in the area who farm, it's that time of year, they're all out in the fields, right? They're all working the fields, they're all driving their tractors. And a little over 2 weeks ago, Dima was driving his tractor in a field, I think about halfway between Blah.NA and Snidrivka. And I ran over a mine. Somehow he managed to survive. He was pretty badly wounded. He didn't lose any limbs, but his left eye doesn't work anymore. And it was touch and go there for a little bit. Nobody was sure if he was going to keep the eye or not. And there's a whole lot of detail I won't go into, but we had to do an evacuation of him from the first hospital where he was because the treatment there was not acceptable, and get him to a much better institute in another location so he could actually get proper care. And that was like fighting the old Soviet bureaucracy, because his hospital still felt like it was from that era. Right? So you can imagine what that was like. So he's now in a good facility. They did an initial small surgery on his eye, and they're letting it heal again before they do like a lens replacement. They've told us that his retina's okay. They don't know about his optic nerve. It suffered a lot of trauma. The only time will tell once they replace the lens if he'll get vision back in his left eye. So the reason I want to tell this story is that it really focuses the attention on the problems that we're all going to be facing in this region over the coming, not just months, but years, right? The number of unexploded munitions in the field, the number of mines in the field, the number of booby traps in the field, shrapnel as well. We have no idea. It's everywhere. It's terrible. And, you know, right before this happened, right before Dima ran over this mine, he and I had a meeting at a restaurant here in Mykolaiv, and we were talking about Blah.NA and what was going on and what was needed. And one of the unfortunate things is that there aren't any other aid groups generally that go to Blah.NA. A lot of people go out there kind of as war tourists, you know, because you can't walk down most of the streets, right? Because there are unexploded munitions embedded in the pavement. Sometimes you can see the butt end of the rocket. Sometimes it's a meter and a half down. You know, so people love to go out there and take souvenirs and take pictures. They don't get a whole lot of assistance. And so, you know, right before he ran over the mine, Dima had me sign, he had a brand new Ukrainian flag, and he had me sign it as the first signature, because we support his village. So, and the other thing that he told me that night was that there were 30 some odd people who had finally made the decision to go back to Blah.NA because they wanted to start rebuilding their homes. And then, you know, just a few days after this, a kid runs over a mine. Right? And this is the guy who knows the area, right? This is the guy who told us where to go that's safe, where to go that's where not to go, where it's not safe. You know, knows all of the trenches, knows, you know, he's the local expert. And he ran over a mine. So I can't even imagine what happens when those 30 people come back, right? This is what we're working on at this point. This is the long-term problem to be solved. And at this stage, the Ukrainian government isn't doing anything for these folks. And I'm sorry, Zelensky, you know, but nothing is being done. So yeah, I think I'll end on that. There's a whole lot more detail to that story, but I don't think we have time for it.
Well, and I'll tell you what, we would love to have you back. And if you'll permit, tried to bring on. It seems that the folks that I've had on everybody that knows somebody, everybody that's working in Ukraine knows somebody who knows somebody who knows, and they all seem to run in the same circle. And
Yeah.
the good ones, it seems like. So when Harley came to me and said, "You've got to talk to Kevin. You've got to have Kevin on," and we reached out, and you just have that feeling. And after talking to you today, the values that we talked about earlier, it's very evident, very clear that that's, and I plan to share this. We're going to have this up on our YouTube channel for people to watch, and we will share this far and wide and get your story out there. And once this Adopt a Village, once this is up and running and we have details, we're going to share that. And I'd be any time to talk about your progress into this. And let's keep going. I think what you're doing is it's more than special.
I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share this mission. And as you said, there's a lifetime worth of work to be done. People like yourself are doing it, and if I can give you a platform, it's an honor to do it.
And I want to dangle one little thing related to the Adopt a Village program, and I'm not going to give a whole lot of detail, and then I'm done. So we have a very interesting demining project that we're working on at this point. And there are, well, I'll say this much. There will soon be a robot in blah.net mapping where all of the unexploded munitions and mines are. And this is thanks to a whole lot of people. I don't have time to thank all of them, but I think it's going to be a really cool project. And I think it might help a lot.
Okay. Yeah. On that, yes, we will. You will have to come back and fill us in. That is fascinating. I mean, yeah. I'll put this in my notes here. Yes, we will have to talk more about this. That's fascinating.
All right.
But no, and as I said, if there's anything that you need from me, any way that we can help, we're friends on Instagram. You let me know, and we'll work on this. I'd be happy to help in every way I can.
Thank you, man. I very much appreciate it. And hey, if anybody out there who's watching, there's donation links on my profile as well as on the Sunflower Project page profile, and we could definitely use all the help that we can get.
And after this is posted on YouTube, I will have the Blue Star Sunflower Project link posted in the description, and ways to donate also posted in the description. So please visit the site, and if you're interested in donating, please do. There's be a lot of life-saving work going on. And as Harley Whitehead is fond of saying, your donations save lives. So,
that they do.
Absolutely. Well, my friend, it has been a pleasure talking to you, Kevin. And
likewise.
Let's do it again.
Okay, sounds good, man. Thank you for the time. I very much appreciate it.
It's an honor. Thank you, sir. Be safe.
You too.